Hey there, I'm Words Per Minute, and today I want to talk to you about web scraping basics, building the Spanish diminutive generator. So I built this web app. It was a labor of love. In building it, I had to learn the basics of web scraping. I found them really interesting, and I hope you will too. So for what we'll cover today, what is the Spanish diminutive? Why does it need a generator? We'll do an intro demo. I had a pain point, and I could not find a pre-existing generator anywhere on the internet, so I had to build my own. In doing that, I ran into a problem. When a user inputs a Spanish word, how do I know that word's gender? That's something we need for the diminutive. For the solution, we ended up web scraping with Cheerio, and I'll give you an exit demo after we finish the explanation. So for the intro demo here, we've got the web app on the right, the Spanish diminutive generator, and we can see if you enter a word such as perro for dog, you get its diminutive form, perrito, a little cute dog, right? So let's throw some other words in here. If I put in casa, spits out casita, and if I hit enter to image search, we see casa and then casita. Or if I put in café for a cup of coffee, we get cafecito, image search, and boom, we see café and cafecito. Finally, let's do gato for cat, and we get gatito. We'll image search again, and boom, we have gato and gatito. So to review the diminutive, it's this form that's often quite playful and endearing in Spanish. Casita for a little house, or a cafecito for a small cafe, or to affectionately refer to a regular size coffee. And we have gatito or gatico for a cat. And no matter where I looked, I could not find another generator out there. I thought at least some graduate student or linguist would have published something, but I couldn't find another solution anywhere. So I needed to solve some of these problems. One of them was word gender detection. My diminutive conversion algorithm, it needs the word's gender. And to review, Spanish has two genders, masculine and feminine. So words ending in A are usually feminine. For example, botella and botellita. And words ending in O are usually masculine. So perro and perrito. But there's an issue. There's many exceptions and niche rules. So two words, for example, that both end in Z, they have different genders. So we've got lapis for pencil, but it's a masculine word, so it ends up with the ito ending, lapisito. We have another word that ends in Z, nariz, for nose, but it's feminine, so it gets the ita ending, so naricita. So instead of using a local dictionary, I decided to scrape a website in order to get the word's gender. To go to the right URL of the web page I wanted to scrape, I knew that it followed a predictable pattern. So the dictionary.com/definición/ the word there. So whatever the user entered, I knew I could navigate there with string interpolation. So that part was straightforward. However, how was I going to ensure that I was grabbing the right element when scraping off the page? So to revisit our lapis example for pencil, we see that this is nombre masculino. So that means it's a masculine word. And to select that off the page when I'm scraping, I know that I could look at the .pos2 class. That would lead me right to this element. There's another one that was included too, but I knew I could ignore that second one in the yellow. And so same for our other example for nariz. We see the same pattern here. We see NF, nombre femenino. And so we have confidence that this is a feminine gender word. Now that you've seen the page we're going to be scraping from, let's go ahead and look at some code. Specifically, how we're going to determine that word's gender and how we handle for special cases, like whether that word is masculine or feminine. So here at the top of the file, we immediately import Cheerio, which is the star of the show. We absolutely need this library. It shines here. So the first thing we do is get that word info. So in the case of nariz, we'd put that right at the end of the URL. We then go and fetch that page, get the text for it, and we load that into Cheerio. So at this point, we can now treat this like a regular web page, which is super handy. So we make sure the word exists. And then just to kick off the logic here, we say, hey, is the word feminine? False. We might change our mind later, but we just start with a simple assumption, and we'll change that if we need to. Another piece of data we grab here is what is the last letter of the word that the user entered? So for example, we'll grab O if they entered amigo, or A if they entered amiga. The next thing we do is we target that CSS class that contains our gender info. So in this case, we go ahead and do our targeting again. This POS2 class, we see it brings up 2 elements, but we want this first one. So we target this POS2 class dot first. So we get the first one and we get the text out of that, and that will give us our gender info. So if a word is masculine, we'll get NM. If it's feminine, we'll get NF. And if it can be both genders, we'll get NM and NF. Let me tell you about this important exception. Many words in Spanish can be multiple genders, and we need a handle for that. For example, presidente can be masculine, el presidente, or it can be feminine, la presidenta. Or a very common word you likely know, we have el amigo or la amiga. So this word can also be multiple genders or 2 genders. Handling for that in the code, we then start to check. So if the gender info length of this scraped page is greater than 2, so it looks like this, NM, comma, space, NF, then let's take a look at the last letter of that word that was output. And so if it ends in O, like amigo, we know it's masculine. If it ends in an E, like presidente, we can safely assume it's masculine. And same for doctor, because the default case, the case where it would be feminine, would be amiga, presidenta, or doctora. If it's just 2 characters, and we have an F in that second location, sweet, then we also know it's feminine. That's all the logic for how our scraper determines whether a word is masculine or feminine. Now that our app is armed with the gender information it needs, it can feed it into the conversion algorithm. And I'll just give you a preview of this since it's outside of the scope of the video. But I wrote this giant conversion algorithm. There's all kinds of exceptions for idioms. It needs to know things like syllable counts and all kinds of other logic going on in here. So I unfortunately wrote this before AI, but recently got some AI in there to clean it up a little bit as well. But yeah, this is all on GitHub if you want to take a look. And with that said, we'll go ahead and play around with the app one more time, see what we get. So we put in burro, for example, we get burrito. And it's kind of a fun example because the diminutive has a different meaning entirely from the original word. Or if we put in te for tea, for example, we get tecito. So we've got some tea, and then it looks like tecito, post almuerzo. So right after lunch, it's saying. And let's also throw in corazón for heart and corazoncito. And we have kind of a medical style heart here, and then a proper diminutive, corazoncito. Sweet. So if you'd like to learn more, you can visit my website, coreyhodge.net. I've got a blog entry up there where you can read more. Or you can visit the web app directly again on your own via this Heroku link or by visiting coreyhodge.net/Spanish diminutive generator. I hope you learned something interesting today, or at least had a good time. Likes and comments certainly help. And otherwise, I'll catch you next time on the Words Per Minute Hacks channel. Hasta luego. Hasta la próxima. Cuídense. Ciao, ciao.